Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to this Bright Blue event, which we're doing with Associated British Ports, and it's called Secure Supply, Supporting Homegrown Green Energy. For those of you who don't know Bright Blue, we're an independent think tank that seeks to defend and improve liberal society. We are liberal conservatives, and we focus on four main themes, which is education policy, social policy, employment policy, and most relevant to this debate, energy and environment policy. And we've been very consequential on government policy in this area for many years, including today, where we saw the end of coal completely for electricity generation, and we called for the phase out in 2016 to be this year in 2024 and set out the trajectory. So we were pleased to see the final end of that important industry. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtags BrightBlue and CPC24. You can also mention us if you're saying nice things at We Are Bright Blue and at AB Ports 21. We're also having people watch on the live stream, so hello to you wherever you are, somewhere sunnier than Birmingham, I imagine. And you are able to ask questions through the live stream. There is just below the video that you're watching a Slido link, so please ask your questions through that. Tell us who you are, what your name is, and ask questions, and then I will field those on your behalf. So as we head towards net zero, which was the legislation that the last Conservative government introduced, there's a big discussion really to be had about what the UK's energy composition should be. How important it is, particularly as we've seen the energy price spikes from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how important it is to have further energy diversification here in the UK. Is it achievable to have affordable, secure and sustainable energy, sometimes called the energy trilemma? And there's obviously the consequences for the environment, but also for the economy as well. What's the likely economic impacts on jobs, on investment from our energy transition to net zero? And we've got to think about the technologies that we need to get that homegrown green energy that lots of people, lots of politicians say we need, and also considerations around building resilience and having better storage systems in place as well. So how do we get that? And what more really can be done to support the expansion of offshore energy, which has become a real crown jewel for the UK in recent years. So we're going to hear 5 minutes each from the speakers, then open it up to you for questions and contributions. So to my near right, we have Graham Stewart, MP, who's the former Minister of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. To his right is Emma Pinchbeck, who's the Chief Executive of Energy UK. To her right is Charles Hendry, who's the former Minister of State for Energy in the coalition government. To my near left is Harriet Cross, who's a new MP for Gordon and Buchan. And then to her left is Tim Morris, who is the Group Head of Corporate Communications at Associated British Ports. So, Graham, over to you first.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you, Ryan. I started as I mean to go on, so I immediately roughed up Emma from the energy industry. That's just what I do. It's how I roll. But anyway, it's very nice to be here and to see such excellent fellow panellists. Can we do all that? Can we sort out the energy trilemma? Well, first thing I'd ask you to do is look at a map of Europe and then have a look at the UK. We just have this phenomenal coastal potential. I'm delighted to say the last Conservative government unlocked it, and we are the architects of where we've got to now. A few facts for you, just from the past. 2010, less than 7% of our electricity, less than 7, came from renewables. It was nearly half when we handed over the reins to Labour in July. Our failure to communicate that to the public who care about this issue, so they actually saw us as being the most successful political party and indeed government in the world in terms of driving the change, is a separate topic. but we really did deliver it, and we did it by bringing forward things like the contracts for difference. Sounds very technical, auction, complex process, many parameters that effectively allowed us to drive down the cost of offshore wind. It wasn't at all obvious that sticking structures into the inhospitable environs of the North Sea was going to lead to cheaper energy. We actually saw the price come plummeting down, £120 a megawatt hour in the first auction in 2015, halved 2017, second auction, 2019, it had come down to below 40. Absolutely extraordinary. Transformed the economics of that for ourselves and for the world through our deployment, and part and parcel, of course, of the Climate Act, which we were the first major party to call for. If there's, remember David Cameron sitting with Tony Juniper at the time, I think from Friends of the Earth, after the Friends of the Earth campaign in 2007 or whenever it was, before leading to the 2008 Climate Change Act. We helped drive that. That created a template. We've then taken that forward in 2019, first major economy on Earth, to legislate for net zero. I think for my sins, I was the first Conservative MP to call for net zero in a joint call alongside Ed Miliband, funnily enough. But that's where we start to come apart after that. But if we harness what we've got, and then we've got to build the grid. I've just come from a meeting about grid. We've got to build that out. We've got to find ways of listening to communities, addressing some of their concerns, and yet getting the stuff built. We can't have HS2 for energy. We've got to get on with it, rewire the nation. If we do that, again, going back, look at that map of Europe, the UK can harness green energy in a way that no one else has the potential to do. If we do it in the right way, we'll do it in a way that's economic, affordable for our consumers, and actually gives us competitive advantage. So remain a big believer, enjoyed doing the role as Energy Minister for a couple of years, working on this, building on, standing on the shoulders of giants who'd taken us to a great position beforehand. First major economy to halve our emissions, so and way ahead of basically everyone else. The Germans probably in second, but overall of major economies, the UK leading the way under the Conservatives. We should be extremely proud of that and better at advertising it. Going forward, the new government has come in with Ed Miliband, and I think personally, seeing I'm in no position at all, I can speak individually, I thought the moratorium, effective onshore wind moratorium, was madness, and that that needed to be lifted, and that it was about the one criticism they made of us I thought had some validity. So that's going to be going ahead. But he's said, and he's sticking to so far, this sort of 2030 decarbonisation of the electricity system. I'm not sure it's actually deliverable. It'd be interesting to hear Emma's thoughts on that. They'll come up with bogus things which sound persuasive, like, well, your plans were 95% decarbonised by 2030, so it's only a 5% different. Making sure that you can always balance the grid and keep the lights on with zero carbon expended, it's not a 5% problem. Whatever the number looks like, it's a lot bigger than that. And what we've got to do as we deliver the solutions to the energy trilemma, and we're in a great position, thanks to the Conservative government, to do so, is that we don't go rushing to 2030, making decisions that accord with a non-deliverable 2030 date anyway, which cut off SMRs, because SMRs aren't going to be contributing in 2030, the renaissance of nuclear. Oh, if it can't help us meet that, let's put that in the go slow lane. Let's other countries develop the technology, have the jobs and opportunity instead of us. The risks around REMA, the Review of Electricity Market Arrangement, very complicated set of arrangements that run our market. Again, if it can't deliver for 2030, and any change to delivery of locational pricing, which sounds a bit arcane, but fundamentally means as we get more and more constraints because of the grid lags, despite best efforts to build it out, that you can't set a locational price so that if there is an excess in Scotland, that they can convert that into industrial competitiveness or other benefits. So that's the sort of thing that could be risked as well. We have got the ability to do it. We were on track to do it. We've led the world, as you know, the UNFCCC would say. We're pretty much the only country in the world under the Conservatives that was on track to deliver what it wants to do. And if we get it right, with the rest of the world following, albeit a bit more slowly, but as they are following and they are signed up at the UN negotiations to follow the path towards net zero, whatever date they've set, then the opportunity for us to lead the way and make us and create an enormous green industry here, as well as a facilitator of other investments, because we've got a clean energy supply, then I think the future is rosy, or it would have been if we'd had a Conservative government. As it is, it's our job to help guide Ed Miliband and his crew on a more sensible path than the one they're currently taking, not least on the fact that 2030, someone put it to me, they said, well, what we don't want to do is wake up, let's assume he could deliver it. We have a decarbonised system, electricity system in 2030, but you really regretted what you'd done in 2032. I mean, what would be the point of that? As my colleague from National Grid was talking about at an earlier panel, you're building this for 40, 50, 60 years. That's what happened the last time we rewired the country. You want to get it right. So we have to move at pace. We're legally obliged to do so because of carbon budgets and the like. But we've got to be sensible, and the danger of having Ed Miliband kind of treating it like some religious crusade rather than a pragmatic, practical, focused effort at delivery at the lowest possible cost and with a minimum amount of hostility generated at the same time. I think we should be supporting them in that direction, and I hope he changes soon from 2030, because 2030 is a nonsense. And as a final barb in the Labour's direction, we're talking about security of energy. It is insane, ladies and gentlemen, to stop having any new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. We will be burning oil and gas in 2050. Our production is already falling, so you could say, what difference does it make? Well, it actually makes a difference to tens of billions of pounds in tax. It means you have an integrated energy industry. People work across oil and gas, fixed bed, offshore wind, floating, you name it. You're undermining the energy businesses in this country, the very ones with the engineering expertise that you need for the transition. So it's utterly bonkers, and it will make not the slightest difference to our consumption. So what we will do is bring in more liquid natural gas. Because if we could get more from Norway, we would. But fundamentally, we'll go to LNG, and LNG has much higher embedded emissions than domestically produced gas. So the overall effect is virtue signalling by this ignorant government, which will cost us jobs, billions of tax, and ironically, while virtue signalling on climate actually put up the emissions of the United Kingdom. Bonkers.
Thank you, Graham. It started off very positive, but then became very doom-mongering.
And the wine's outside, that's the problem.
Right, Emma, over to you.
I mean, the wine is outside, so I'll try and keep this brief.
Unlike me, it's
Yeah.
fair enough.
Well, no, I don't understand what I did to you, Graham. There's a lot about what Graham's just said that I agree with, actually. So the bigger problem is trying to find something new to say to you, especially because, you've been at Fringes, probably both of us, and more a day. I think the last 10 years have really taught us something valuable, which is we're pretty clear on what the cheapest system for the UK looks like in the 2030s. And there are various system models. Government has one, Imperial College has one. They all spit out, the CCC has one. They all spit out a sort of similar result, including from the new nationalised system operator, which is renewables is around 70% of the mix. You can go higher than that, and I should say it's actually gone up, every sort of 2 years I've been working, and that's because the kind of cap on what's sensible to do with renewables is how you can manage variability in the system. So as renewables have become more efficient, we've had more cheaper batteries available. The costs of managing renewables have come down overall, so you can integrate more of them confidently. We then know that we should have and make use of at least one, probably two large-scale nuclear reactors in this country. So that means a decision on Sizewell and possibly another, and if not another large-scale nuclear reactor, then potentially things like SMRs, and that's because you're looking for that balancing for the large offshore wind fleet on the East Coast. Big load, transmission connected, large kit is a feature of the UK system. And then you have a portion of the UK system left, and it's about the last 20%, where we know we need what we call flexible generation, and that's stuff to complement renewables. It includes some storage, everything from pumped hydro through to batteries, but also some form of electricity generation, which can stop-start around renewables. And at the moment, the solution that we have for that is gas, carbon capture and storage, or gas decarbonised with hydrogen. There isn't much else other than those technologies. On the scorecard, I'd say the previous governments over the last 14 years have done a absolutely brilliant, beyond expectations job of scaling up the UK's renewables industry. And beyond even the expectations of the renewables industry, I should say. When I went to work for offshore wind, we were sort of like, someone reminded me the other day that actually I was paid at one point by the renewables industry when I was working for them to say that I thought it was, more appropriate for money to go to onshore wind rather than offshore wind, because we weren't sure how fast we could scale offshore wind. It's the sector itself thinking that. The government and the sector at the time thought £100 per megawatt hour was a reasonable target for 2030, and because of competitive mechanisms and a focus on the market and market competition, because of the Conservative government, we actually went much faster than we thought was possible. And I think that is also something else that we've learned over the last decade, that it is a partnership between the public sector and government and private industry, and where you can mobilise capital. If the government sets a clear signal and you've got market frameworks that work, it's amazing how fast you can go, and it's certainly faster than the state ever thinks is possible. Looking ahead, on the scorecard, things that we have done less well, I think, over the last 10 years include that bit on gas transition. We don't, and novel technologies full stop. So things like SMRs, hydrogen, carbon capture, we've had many opportunities to invest in and walk back. And I remember Osborne talking about investing in carbon capture and storage, and kind of, we walk all the way down the path and then we drop it at the last second. We have to change that. We realistically don't have other technologies for heavy industry, but also for the last bit of power. I'd say the same on new nuclear. Large scale and small scale. I'd say the same on some forms of storage, long duration energy storage. So those things we need more on. The broader point I'd like to make, and I think I said this in an early panel, so sorry, but a lot of the mechanisms over the last 10 years have been focused quite rightly on scaling up new technology and decreasing price. It's all been cost. For large-scale technologies, even if you're not yet feeling that on your bills, which is a separate question we can maybe come to, it's very clear that renewables are now cheap. We've done that job, and we know how to scale technologies. I think we might have missed a bit of a trick in asking about value, and that's in two frames. One, sometimes we should invest in technologies because they're good for export, even if we aren't going to use them in a huge way in our own energy system. That's what China has been doing with a lot of new energy technologies like electric vehicles. It's for their own market, but they've also got an eye on export. They've got an eye on the European automotive industry. They're trying to take that market share. What's our equivalent of that? It could be in carbon capture, it could be in new nuclear, it could be in batteries, it could be in digital innovation, but what is the thing that we've got? It could be offshore wind. What's the stuff that we've got? Cable manufacturing, helicopters. What are the things of British excellence which we're going to invest in, not just for our own electricity system, but also more broadly for our contribution to wider decarbonisation and to own a bit of the energy transition? And relatedly, and I'll stop here, but we often haven't been as thoughtful as we could be about strategic investment, and under the previous government, which was very welcome, we invested in port infrastructure, which has enabled offshore wind development. We have looked at doing the industrial clusters programme, which brought together industrial demand and carbon capture, even if we haven't quite gone all the way down that process. That sort of smart thinking about industry, jobs, manufacturing, technologies and economic value more broadly, alongside energy policy, I think, is the challenge for the next 10 years. And I'm sure it will come up, but we can come on to affordability and bills. But I suppose, to finish on the good note, the good news is the last 10 years, the last 14 years have demonstrated much more is possible than we thought was possible. And there is absolute clarity that you can have a clean energy system which is also secure and cheap.
Great. Thank you, Emma. I'm going to move now to Harriet. It'd be good to get your perspective as a new MP, an MP with a coastal line as well.
Yeah, so my constituency, Gordon and Buchan, for sort of geographically sits in Aberdeenshire above Aberdeen. So obviously Aberdeen, energy capital of Europe, sort of somewhere where energy is in our blood and literally in every household. Everyone knows someone who works in the sector or is related to the sector. So we also, therefore, have most to lose if the transition is not right. Because it's not just the direct jobs, it's supply chain jobs, it's hospitality jobs, taxi driver jobs, everything up there is related to the current energy sector and therefore the future energy sector. And one thing I think is the key difference between the Conservative approach to net zero and green energy and the Labour approach is pragmatism. we both agree, but we need to transition. But it's actually how we do it, the speed we do it, and almost making the perfect the enemy of the good. And at the moment, the Conservative approach, as we've heard, has been very good. But we need to make sure that we're not therefore rushing to arbitrary targets, which 2030 is, and with that lose investment, lose jobs, which are going to be the things which actually help us in the long term transition properly and fully. So when I look at the trilemma, sustainability is one of the main things I look at, but that's not in terms of climate and it's not in terms of net zero, it's the holistic approach. And within that has to include jobs and it has to include investment, because it's sustainable investment and sustainable jobs which will actually drive the investment into greener technologies, which we can all then sort of rely on and build upon and drive us towards a net zero or a greener energy sort of future. So at the moment, obviously we've got the oil and gas industry in the northeast. We are going to be a hub for green investment as well. We've obviously offshore wind. We've got a lot of offshore wind, but again, coming back to the sustainability view, it has to be balanced. So are we going to be balancing the energy needs with, for example, our tourism and agricultural needs? Because ultimately they're going to be battling over the same bits of land. So again, instead of rushing towards decarbonising the grid by 2030, we should be pulling back a little bit and having a proper conversation. Where should this infrastructure go? It has to go somewhere. We all understand it has to go somewhere. But we need to make sure that we're actually preserving other bits of the economy which are also important, and therefore bringing communities with us. Because in a democracy, which thankfully we are, we have to have buy-in across the board in order for this to work. This is a massive change, a huge change which we are bringing onto the country, rightly, but it has to be done with the buy-in of the country as a whole, but in particular communities such as mine, where we're going to feel the biggest impacts, both in terms of visually, in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of the loss of jobs and the local economy if we get it wrong. So, and then if we look at things like GB Energy, which obviously Labour Party are flagging as the be all and end all, that's sort of what their new energy policy is relying on. At the moment, the investment, the public money that's being put into it, so we're all paying for this, is at risk of basically going in the top and coming out the bottom because of the relationship between that and the other policies which have been brought in. In particular, things like the windfall tax or getting rid of investment allowances, which are going to drive away investment from the same businesses, which are going to drive investment into the renewable technologies of the future. So again, coming back to that pragmatic response and pragmatic approach, we can do this, we should do this, but if we rush it, we will miss out. And we will be putting public money effectively down the drain and driving away private investment, which is already there. We already have the private investment, but we need a secure business environment for it to stay and for us to be seen as the place where in the future we can be the place which we want to invest and need to invest. Because don't get us wrong, in the UK and particularly in Aberdeenshire, we have world-class supply chains, unrivaled anywhere in the world for delivering big multi-billion-pound projects, which this is. This is not a small-scale thing. This is a huge change. We are able to deliver that up in the northeast of Scotland, but the money will not come just because we wish it to. We have to allow it to come by being sustainable and being an attractive place for, because it's a huge risk. If you're putting that much money into a new, effectively untested technologies, it's a huge risk. These companies need to know that money is actually going to be used and secured, and actually that they're not going to be penalised for investing, which is why, for example, investment allowances are so important to driving investment into the future. And I think sort of picking up on Graham's point as well of we must not look at, we have to look at the cost to the Treasury of getting this wrong. So even things like, so Graham mentioned the stopping oil and gas licences. The changes to the windfall tax is projected to cost the Treasury £12 billion. And if we're looking at that, they're putting £8 billion into GB Energy, and I mean, you could say that £8 billion, but just not changing the windfall tax. So again, pragmatic approaches. This thing isn't unsolvable, but we can't just go headlong to targets and miss actually the nuances along the way, because that's what we're going to need into the future to actually make this a success. Great,
thank you, Harriet. And obviously we know now that GB Energy will be in Aberdeen. I mean, you've talked about some of the kind of the dangers that of the Labour approach to it, but do you feel there's a positive role that GB Energy could play? Are there things that you think as an institution it could focus on and should focus on?
I want it to be a success. We all want it to be a success. But the difference is that it won't just be a success by putting some public money into it, putting a logo on it and setting it on its way. It needs to have a proper approach. And we've got, for example, projections of it will create jobs. But how is it going to create these jobs? Where are the jobs going to be? When are they going to be created? And are they actually going to be transferable from the jobs from today? Because today's jobs are the people with the skills. And that's what we need going forward. So yes, it has opportunity because it's going to be tapping in to the base, the huge knowledge base that we have in the Northeast. But it's not going to happen just by being and sitting in Aberdeen. It has to actually have the policies behind it, the holistic policies. As I say, if we're driving investment away because of other Labour policies, it's not going to work. So there is opportunity for it to be there. There's opportunity to develop green technologies within Scotland, within the UK, but it will not happen if at the same time we're scaring away current investment, because that is the investment that we need and the businesses that we need, which will bring these technologies forward.
Yeah, my understanding of GB Energy is very unclear what it's actually focusing on yet.
Everything is according to its descriptions, which is its problem. It doesn't have a clear brief.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to come out of this, because hopefully civil servants and others can help it get a rational purpose, because there must be good things it can do, but it's quite hard to see what they are. I mean, the supply chain, go back to that, in that piece, somebody with a little bit of financial heft able to, because it may just take a nudge to allow that investment to be made in the UK to build or fabricate product X rather than go to Poland. Maybe there's a role there. But as it is, it's supposed to be in community energy. It's supposed to de-risk nuclear. I don't know what they think Great British Nuclear's role is. It's supposed to be doing everything. And it's an absolute mess. So I hope Emma and others who've got the ear of the new Secretary of State can get it to do something rational, because we can't afford to have 5 years waste. We need it to do something useful.
Yeah, I wouldn't pretend to have the ear of any politicians, Graham. But I think what the industry has said is that, and it's a bit this the value gap thing. I think what could be potentially quite exciting about GB Energy is if it does stuff the market hasn't done well. And on that list, I would say maybe riskier technologies, where if it wants to come in early, underwrite them, and maybe get a benefit back to the sovereign wealth fund or the exchequer or whatever the kind of flow of the money out could be. That's quite interesting to think of it in that way. I would put the technologies I mentioned earlier in that bucket. It could also do some convening of industry. In opposition, the government was talking about an idea I'm going to die on a hill over, because I think it was good, which is like block tendering or procurement for key supply chain components. This is because the interesting thing about that is for stuff like cabling, the Dutch system, there's this anecdote going around the industry, which is mostly true, that TenneT, which is the Dutch system operator, has block booked every factory slot out to 2035 to manufacture cable for their own transmission upgrades. Every country in the world is competing over these technologies now. What the supply chain likes is consistent order books and scale. So if you can get scale, and sometimes on a single project that's quite hard, but if you can say, look, we've got 3 projects and we're going to get them together and we're going to bid in and underwrite that risk somehow, that could be quite interesting. They've also they've announced already that the first thing it will do is the Crown Estate change, and they are proposing basically for the state to take the risk on early development in return for, I think, what will be probably a fee from the developers. There's a flat kind of income going in. And that's to simplify the process of developing offshore wind projects. None of these are bad ideas. They're all kind of getting at like complexities in the market. I think the challenges others have talked about, which is you don't want, what I'm not clear on yet from the government, is whether 2030 is the most important thing for GB Energy to be helping them to achieve. Respectfully, we would say probably GB Energy doesn't get you your 2030 stuff because it takes long to set it up. Is it value to the UK consumer or taxpayer, as in are they going to invest in stuff that gets them an immediate return? Or is it getting a stake in stuff as fast as possible? And those last two are quite distinct, because if you want a stake in stuff as fast as possible, you're probably going for things like solar and onshore wind, which is already established. If you want a big payoff in the long run, it's taking on the riskier stuff that I've just described. And I think until they're or fourth one, potentially, is that this wider value thing. You're getting your industrial benefits in your supply chain, and it's not about the GB electricity system. It's a bigger economic case. I think until they really define, fabulously dressed, until they really define what it's for, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure they have. So it's that, like, we are saying that to them, Graham, don't worry. I don't know how much we're heard. I don't know how much government ever fully hears the industry, but we are making that case. Yeah, there you go. It's going to be mean to you now.
Great. Okay, let's move now to Charles.
Well, Ryan, thank you. I want to start off talking about ambition. We've heard from Graham, we've heard from others about the huge success in the United Kingdom of decarbonisation. Not only have we managed to decarbonise by 50%, but we've grown the economy by 70% over that time. That is a completely extraordinary achievement. But when I became a minister in 2010, almost nobody would have believed that was possible. We inherited a set of targets from the previous Labour government that we should have 30% of our electricity coming from renewables by 2020. The only people who thought we could do that were the people running the energy companies who actually would have the job of building that new infrastructure. And we got there because we had a plan, we had a funding mechanism, the CFDs were fundamental to it. We set up the cost reduction task force for offshore wind, which brought the price down not from 120 but 170 pounds a megawatt hour to well under 100. And then through the auction system, we brought it down much further still. And so you have to start in politics by aiming high. You may not always get there, but if you don't have a high level of ambition, you're not going to succeed high. Low ambition, you succeed low. And so that if we look at where this government's going, I think we have to try and find the space where we can work with them. Because at the end of the day, if they get to net zero by a clean energy grid by 2030, and we have been the ones who've been saying the whole time you're not going to get there, then we're on the wrong side of the debate as we go into that next election. We hold them to account, we challenge them, we show where the difficulties are going to be. But let's be a party of great ambition in this process. And they are bringing in tremendously good people. That Chris Stark, who was the head of the Committee on Climate Change, coming in as the Thunderbirds role of head of mission control in DESNZ, the Jürgen Meyer, the head of Siemens, to head up GB Energy. We may not know what it's going to do, but you couldn't have anybody better to do it. But that somebody who understands energy and the industry side of it. And I want to focus particularly on that link, partly because ABP are kindly paying for our drinks tonight. So let's look at how you'd get together the energy policy we need with the industry policy. Because in all honesty, we haven't always got that correct. The focus on offshore wind, on relentlessly driving the price down through the auction mechanism, meant that people could only successfully bid into those auction rounds by importing the turbines and the blades and the gears from overseas. We couldn't manufacture them as cost effectively in the UK. And I think it would have been better to have had a more nuanced approach, which enabled more focus to be on UK content. We've seen some fantastic investments, Siemens in Hull, and examples like that, but we haven't had as much as we might have hoped. And as we look at other industrial opportunities, then we should be getting that balance right between the energy, clean energy side and the industrial supply chain. And our ports are going to be incredibly important in this process. For offshore wind, as it goes forward, and we see more of that being built, then the servicing of them, the people who go out and build them will be based in the ports. We're going to need more cabling, as you're saying. Well, that we're already looking at building cable in the port of Hartlepool and the port of Hunterston. This can be a fantastic new clean industry for some of those port communities. That as we look at other sectors, it obviously makes sense that if you're developing carbon capture and storage, because we will continue to have gas in the mix for many years to come, then you use our port infrastructure, and that the Immingham and Hull again are areas where we're looking at seeing this happening in Teesside, so that the ports will be fundamental to being able to develop those clusters, those industrial and energy clusters where you can capture the CO2 and then you can take it out and bury it in the North Sea. If we're going to develop hydrogen, and I'm sceptical on the timescale and the cost of hydrogen, but if we are going to see hydrogen coming in, then again, that the ports have a natural role to play. They've got space which can often be used for that and for other approaches. And then my challenge perhaps to ABP is set aside a chunk of your ports for bringing forward some emerging technologies. A wind turbine used to be 3 to 5 megawatts. They're now building them at 15 megawatts. To go bigger than that, you've almost certainly got to reinvent them, and you've got to go for what's called a vertical axis wind turbine, which goes like that, rather than like that. Work is being done in the UK to develop that technology. Let's make some space available in a windy port and say, okay, trial them here, be a part owner of those projects, and let's see how we can help to take that forward. I'm passionate about the potential for tidal. Well, if you've got a dry dock, then turn that into a micro-tidal facility, and where we can improve those tidal turbines, and then we can accelerate the tidal opportunities around these islands, because we have the second highest tidal range in the world outside the Bay of Fundy in Canada, and we are not using it. And so the ports can be critical for that infrastructure and for taking forward those opportunities. And finally, on the EV supply chain, we saw what happened 2 years ago when Europe was over-dependent on a single source of supply from what proved to be an unreliable country, gas from Russia. We should be able to see now where the next supply chain crisis is coming from. It is our over-reliance on China for the core components of the batteries, of the cathodes. If we are going to have a sustainable EV industry in Europe, then we have to do more of that work here. If you are going to bring the spodumene, which is a rock which has a lithium, to process it in the UK, then it makes sense to bring it into the ports and to co-locate on those port sides the new facilities, which are critical to our long-term energy security. So I think that we are at a super exciting time. We have done so much in this space. It would be madness for the Conservative Party to cede ownership of some of those changes to the Labour Party, because we will not win an election until we're in the right place on these issues. But we are now in this extraordinary period of invention and innovation, and the ports, I think, have an absolutely fundamental part of making that successful.
Great, thank you, Charles. Finally, let's move to Tim.
Well, Charles certainly earned his free drink from me, hasn't he? Thank you for coming, everybody, and well done on finding the room. So my name is Tim Morris. I work for Associated British Ports. Associated British Ports is the UK's largest port owner and operator. We operate 21 ports around the coast of Britain. We basically do two things. Number one is we move stuff. We like to call it keeping Britain trading. So we move about a quarter of everything that moves in and out of the UK by sea, and that was worth about £157 billion to the UK economy in 2022. What else we do? That's a brilliant, little fanfare-y noise for my 157 billion. But that's, so you might think, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting, and those are big numbers, etc. But what is the Ports guy doing on an energy panel? And the reason is because the second thing that we do is we like to call it enabling the energy transition. So, as Charles has said, one of the few success stories that the UK has in terms of a low-carbon green energy supply chain is the Siemens factory in Hull, which features, coincidentally, and I didn't ask him to say this, on the front of the little green envelope, the leaflet that you have on your seats. So that's somewhere where we're already playing a role. And what we do is we have some really ambitious plans to go further, and I'll come back to that. But we are committed to playing our role in delivering the big goals of the green energy, the energy transition. So a more sustainable future, a more resilient and competitive energy supply, but also at the same time, crucially, jobs, growth, opportunity, prosperity, largely in our coastal communities, but also in broader industrial areas. So that's who we are. That's why we're sponsoring this. Why we're so pleased to be sponsoring this event and have such an illustrious panel. The big problem with going last is everyone said everything before. And I would agree with a tremendous amount of what we said. So I'm just going to bring one extra point to the discussion, which is that to meet those big goals, overall goals of sustainable future, resilient and competitive system, jobs and growth, I think we probably need a mix of domestic and global coming together here in the UK. And I'll try and illustrate that by two specific examples of the projects that we're working on. So in terms of the massive domestic opportunity we have, come with me to Port Talbot in South Wales. In the news today for all the wrong reasons, it's the day they start shutting down the last of the two blast furnaces on the steelworks. We are the port in Port Talbot. And our vision is to transform the port into being a world-class hub for floating offshore wind. I think as Charles has said, we haven't always in this country done a great job of grabbing the jobs and investment in the supply chain that has come with our tremendous record of success in deploying fixed bottom offshore wind, but we have a massive opportunity now, a new wave of what's called floating offshore wind off the west coast, predominantly of the UK, and for us in the Celtic Sea. So again, if I'd like you to refer you to the green handout, partly so we don't have to carry them back to the office, you'll see a CGI in it of what we think it could look like. And these are the sort of massive turbines that Charles was looking at. So that's a huge opportunity in a community that desperately needs it right now to create, deploy billions of pounds worth of investment, create thousands of jobs. The more international element of that is something that we're doing in Immingham called the Immingham Green Energy Terminal, which is a piece of infrastructure which connects Britain to the world. And it does that in two ways. Number one, in hydrogen, and Charles is right to say that the targets we've got are very bold in terms of pace and cost. By connecting to global hydrogen supply chains, we have the ability to both import and export what we're doing. So as we come up the curve in terms of cost competitiveness, we can move more into an export mode. In the near term, we can import green hydrogen and ammonia in order to fuel our industries, fuel our transport systems faster and a more competitive rate than we were before. And then the second thing it does is it acts as an import point for sequestrated carbon. One of the UK's massive advantages is our geology. We have world-leading ability to store carbon under the North Sea. It's a huge opportunity that Europe is going to need to access. And we have the ability, and we as a company have the ambition to do it. That word ambition is a tremendous one. Our chief executive talks about it both as an opportunity but also an obligation. It is the strategic growth opportunity of our lifetime for our company, but we also have an obligation to deliver for the communities around where we work. And I'll leave you with this a sobering statistic that I came across last week, which we've just been involved in some polling work in one of the areas where our ports are, and we asked people in the local communities their attitudes towards green energy. The two most sceptical cohorts were the over 60s, which was disappointing, but perhaps not that surprising. The one that really got me was the second most sceptical cohort was the 18 to 24-year-olds, because they equated the green transition and energy and green energy and industrial decarbonisation, which is a lack of jobs and a lack of opportunity for them in the future. So we have all got an obligation not just to do all the stuff that's high-level policy, but deliver for those 18 to 24-year-olds on the ground.
Great, thank you. Very interesting, Tim. Thank you for that. Okay, let's open it up to questions and thoughts from the floor. So if you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be great. And just a reminder for people, if you're watching on the live stream, you can ask questions via the Slido link just underneath the YouTube channel. Okay, we'll start with this gentleman here.
A couple of panellists have said that renewable energy is cheap. Isn't that just a fib? Surely it's only cheap because it's subsidised through contracts of difference that are paid for by consumers. And if it's so cheap, why did the auction before last fail? And why did the current auction have to have massive price increases to get anyone interested?
Okay, I'm going to take a round of questions. This gentleman here. Yes, you.
Hi, it's Jonathan Leake. I'm the energy editor at the Telegraph. I've just got a question for Emma, which is maybe a bit personal. But Emma, are you confirmed yet as chair of the Climate Change Committee?
Oh, Jonathan, I made it almost all the way through 2 conferences without anyone asking that.
Okay, and then this gentleman here.
Hi, my name's Andy Forster from Hull, the renewables capital of the north. Yes. Yeah, a plug-in. I just wonder if the panel are worried about what seems to be happening in the EV market, where it seems to have gone into reverse a little bit over the last few months.
Okay, thank you.
No pun
Emma,
intended.
you've got a lot of questions to answer there.
I just oh god. All right. So the straightforward one on the personal question is I haven't handed in my notice to Energy UK, and Jonathan, were I to be changing jobs, you would absolutely be on the list of people I would tell before, the wider public. I think we'd be writing out to all our journalist friends and contacts and stakeholders if there was a change of leadership at Energy UK. So till you hear it from me, no. I think that role is really important. I think it would be good to get someone in post before the COP that's coming up, because that's a kind of big in government. And one of the things we were talking about on this panel, actually, just to bring it back to the subject matter, is this sort of whether or not Labour's focus as the government is going to necessarily get them their carbon budgets. You know, we've been talking about the 2030 target, and we've got Chris Stark in government overseeing the 2030 target. There is currently not someone in government overseeing the carbon budgets, and I think that is a problem given the express intention of the government to make progress on those things. On renewables, not a fib, I promise. Energy UK is a cross-technology trade body, so I've got thermal generators as well as renewables and everything else. The only thing I don't have is upstream oil and gas extraction. So when I tell you that that system is the cheapest, it's because we're looking across the technologies. The best resources I can suggest you look at are things like the International Energy Agency levelised cost figures, which will give you the international picture. At government level, it's hard to get like for like because we're not doing, you can look at the capacity market mechanism, which underwrites gas contracts, and you can look at the CFD, and obviously a lot of our generation in the UK is on price support. But on levelised cost, renewables are cheaper than gas. And that increasingly includes the cost of balancing the system, so the cost of things like batteries and storage. In order, this is rough, don't all yell at me, but roughly nuclear is expensive. Hydrogen and carbon capture might be up there, above or below. Then you've got gas, then you've got renewables, you've got batteries down here, and there's different kinds of renewables in that stack. What was I going to say about the costs there on renewables? I think what is true, absolutely true, is that we're in a higher cost of capital age, and it is a challenge for this government. Higher interest rates means all things are expensive to build. Someone was telling me the other day that trying to get a new CCGT, a new gas turbine off the ground, costs them north of like £200 per megawatt hour. You set that against the auction results for offshore wind. But even then, I would expect to see prices in the auctions maybe tick up a bit because it's just more expensive to build stuff than it was 10 years ago. So it's certainly a bit of a complex picture, and I appreciate that having auctions and me using phrases like levelised cost tell us a picture, but we are technology agnostic. So when I tell you that renewables are cheap, it's not just because I'm being paid to say so. I'd get yelled at if it weren't true by the other bit of the sector. The most important thing to say though is I think another thing that we haven't necessarily done and should do is manifest that cheapness to the consumer. And by that I mean, I am telling you that renewables are cheap. We've made this amazing progress in the power sector, and your bills are still very high. And so for the public who don't work in energy, it just feels like a fib, even if it isn't. And I think we need to do far more on bills and working out how to get the cheap price of renewables through the system to households. And that is it. I would have that quite high up my list of policy challenges as a new government. And then I think, secondly and importantly, we need to make progress on the demand side of energy, so the technologies that can benefit from low electricity prices, and that includes things like heat pumps, electric vehicles, and electrification. And that, again, is not a challenge that I've heard much about from the incoming government. And I think it's fair to say we haven't done enough on over the past 10 years because it's tricky. But, yeah, there you go.
Great. Thank you, Emma. And completely agree with you on the consumer bills point as well.
Yeah.
Graham, this point about the EV market, worry about that? Slowing down?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen by contrast that I think Norway, albeit small country sitting on £1 trillion of wealth fund, most of which comes from oil and gas exports, but still they've got to 90% electric cars. So I think what they do show is it can be done, and it can be done in a way which consumers like. So the EV market, there is the issue of getting that balance between getting the charging system out there that gives people confidence, as well as the cost and the economics, because you've got this kind of injustice. If you've got a private home with a drive, you can get yourself on the OVO or Octopus or whatever it is supersonically cheap overnight charging, and then you speak to a minicab driver in London, and they are who happens not to have that, and they're actually paying an awful lot, vastly amount more in order to charge their vehicle, in order to do it. So there is a lot to be done to build that infrastructure out. We did a lot, but we need to, going forward, we need to do more. It's a consumer choice area, isn't it? So what we've got to do is make sure that it's done ideally with cheap renewables, going back to the first question as well. One of the things we've done, which is a sort of techie point, but effectively energy suppliers that go bust, green levies. I'm trying, Emma or Charles will be able to help me here with a list of various costs for kicking in the system. We shoved it all on electricity for kind of administrative convenience. So we actually, although we have this high electricity price, we've got, I think, the lowest gas price. So somehow we've managed to get the economics all wrong. I say that as the former energy minister, effectively of making it super cheap to burn the thing you don't want them to burn, and make it very expensive for them to use the thing you do want them to use, which is electricity. So one of the things this incoming, we were wrestling with it as part of this review of electricity market arrangements, but trying to see how we could unpick it. Because, of course, the people you make happy when you make a change, you never make as happy as the people you make unhappy. So there'll be this kind of thing, my God, you're shoving up everyone's bills for heating their home at the time when they can least afford it. But actually, if you're going to help make a heat pump more economically competitive, you need to get away from this artificial overpricing of electricity and underpricing of gas. But that's just one of many elements. But again, just backing up, and as Emma's in a great position to talk about it, because she does have that combined, member base. But Aurora, the energy consultancy, looked at it. Every scenario they've looked at comes out cheaper if you've got renewables on the system. And it's also got an interesting sort of technical quirk, is that why then, if it's cost effective, does it need this subsidy? Why does it need a guaranteed income? Well, the nature of renewables, unlike a gas or coal-fired power station, is you basically all your expenditure, nearly all of it, is up front, a long payback. So the cost of capital is the critical element. So that's why we kind of provide that security, because once you've got that down, it allows the transformation of costs, which we've seen with offshore wind, etc. So you've got that going on. But of course, what it does is, once you've got all these renewables, when those renewables get to dictate the price, and at the moment it's still 60+%, the professor will correct me, or Emma will, is set by gas. So the prices have actually been set by gas, even as we've upgraded renewables. Every year from now on, we're going to see the percentage of the time that the price is set by gas coming down and set by renewables. And once you've got lots of renewables, they've already got their levelized cost, they actually help drive that cost down. So it's a kind of, makes it peculiar. They needed the guaranteed funding in order to be able to be built, coming on the system, take gas out of the system, and drive the cost, the actual sale cost down. So it's a kind of complex world and hard to explain. I've probably done a very poor job.
Right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to bring final questions and thoughts from the audience. So, last chance. So we'll start with this gentleman here.
Thank you. I know many years Ercihan Charlie Henry from 2012 we meet in Parliament, and he was that time worked for the Central Asia. I'm from I born in Uzbekistan. I know him very well, and I was deputy of mayor of city of Zarashan, where is produced gold, meaning gold and uranium. But we have project now. My question: the Green H2 Energy project for Safe Planet, and we have patents for that. And I spoke with our chairman, Richard Graham. He have this as well, all project here. And then they told me we'll see. But I know old school, many years. He recommend you need to go speak with the energy group, your minister, and you need to give them. This is a very serious project. You need to talk with them. So my question, who I need to give this, and I can give, and you need to see, check. I give you my business card. I have my company here many years, 20 years.
Right.
Yeah, and my question is,
who dares step forward? Okay, and then any other final thoughts or questions? Yes, this gentleman here.
As Charles knows well, Andrew Henderson, I'm the pleasing state chairman, but I invested in a tidal power scheme in 2014 and have not seen anything since. It's a huge untapped source, so many meetings with many government ministers. As a Conservative Party member, we have failed on that one. Labour, who knows, we're hoping to meet Ed fairly soon. But we have a source of power that is reliable, forecastable, etc. An opportunity to build an industry in the UK if the government had gotten out of the way 10 years ago, the power would be there. But all the costs are up front. But we know from the French one, which is as old as me, that the cost of producing power is literally a few cents. My friend here is literally a few cents.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists just for their kind of concluding remarks. Maybe you want to come back on some of the questions there or the one prior. So I'll start with Charles.
So I think on the personal question to Emma, I'd like to say that you should be Chief Executive of the Committee on Climate Change.
Got this
And
job already,
having
though.
somebody with your degree of knowledge and expertise would be brilliant in that role. On tidal, Andrew, let me just pick up on that. I mean, I did a review for government 8 years ago. If the government had accepted that and they'd gone ahead with Swansea at that time, it would now be operational. We'd be seeing how it worked. We'd be able to evaluate how we go forward. I felt it was an incredible missed opportunity. It predates Graham, so there's no criticism of Graham in that. But it was, I think, a mistake. We have the second highest tidal range in the world. You look at which of the industries where we can copy what happened in offshore wind, where the UK can be a global champion, and I think it's carbon capture, I think it's next generation nuclear, and I think it's tidal. Lots of others will have a role to play, but those are the ones where we can be global leaders. And so I do hope that we will still see some of that taken forward, because otherwise people will just look at the tides coming in and out every single day, and they'll wonder why on earth we're not taking advantage of it.
Thank you, Charles. Tim, final thoughts from you.
If there were, I was going to ask you to walk away with 2 words. There would be opportunity and obligation. So this is a massive opportunity for Wales. For the UK and places like Wales, places like the Humber, etc. Right, nothing else is going to come to Port Talbot and replace those 3,000 jobs like something like this. So let's go away. Let's work on it together. We work with politicians of all parties in order to really deliver not just the change in the energy system, but also the jobs, prosperity, investment opportunity for local communities as well. And to finish on the loving note, I think Emma would be excellent as well.
Just to be clear, I have a job right now that I really enjoy. So.
Hypothetically.
Emma, you haven't denied it.
No, I haven't. I'll tell you why, Jonathan. It's because I think there have been stories in the press publicly. There are names that always turn up on the lists for these jobs. I would be very surprised if my name weren't on a list for this job, partly because there are very few people as weird about carbon budgets as me in the UK, but also because of the work that I do. That's not the same thing as saying I've been approved or saying the same thing as I am leaving my current job. It's nevertheless like a complete privilege that people are talking about it at events like this. Never on the record though. Usually they just come up to me after the event and ask me. But it is, I think, this panel should be rightly about the energy transition. And the thing that I have said about it to people is, what an extraordinary thing that the chief executive of the incumbent energy sector, representing the full range of technologies, through an energy crisis, with energy kind of at the heart of economic conversations, can also be linked to a job which is about delivering the UK carbon budgets, and that tells you everything you need to know about how rapidly the energy transition is going, that can even be a thing. And the sector is being nice about it because they think that that's absolutely a good thing for them too. So.
Yeah. Harriet.
Yeah, so I think when we're looking at our ambition for progressing to green energies, I think what we need to look at is our limiting factors. But one of them, as Charles quite rightly said, shouldn't be ambition. So put that aside, what do we need to focus on in order to accelerate? So that's things like private investment. We need to get that flowing through. We need to make sure that we've got the infrastructure in place, again, linked to the private investment. And we need to make sure that the grid is at capacity to utilise it. So one of the big changes, or one of the really good changes I thought we talked about in the last government, was changing the process in which we were allowing new technologies to link to the grid or new developments. And that was on a first ready basis as opposed to a first sort of application basis. So that frees up and expands the number of projects we can get onto the grid, get generating, and therefore increase our amount of renewables that we're using in our energy mix. And all of this is doable. All of this is fundamentally doable, but we just need to make sure that we're doing it at a speed and a pace which is bringing communities together with us, which is bringing current jobs with us, and which is bringing the investment and the businesses which are there now into the future. and we can be one of the countries that really leads us forward, because we've got the pedigree and we've got the history and we've got the skills and we've got the businesses. We just need to put those together and actually make sure that we are the ones leading this forward, because this is a huge opportunity for the UK, and we need to make sure we're grasping it and not looking back in 10 years' time and just wishing that we had.
Thank you, Harriet. Emma, above and beyond what you've just said, is there anything else?
Well, I thought that was quite a nice.
It was a good, yes. Okay, so Graham, final thoughts from you.
Thank you, Ryan. Well, I agree with the people. There's a huge opportunity here, and we should have a vision going forward, a really positive vision, and one which looks, I think, mentioned earlier, that we look not just to make this green transition, but get the maximum value out of it. So if Emma does decide when offered it, despite the gross unfairness she showed, in my view, in an almost partisan way against the last Conservative government, which is why I ribbed her. But I say that most seriously. I give her grief on that front, because I also know it'll be enormously helpful to her if that's heard. But if she takes that role on, then looking at how we get the best value out of this, we've got all the things that Harriet listed. We've also got we've got the geology, we've got the topography, we've got everything. And this really, that's what should be so exciting. Get this right, and this transition, which does have costs and offsets and all the rest of it, for the UK could be a peculiar advantage. That's what I would love about it. The fact that we could come out, we can lead the world, we can show the best way of getting more countries to follow us and actually fulfil their targets. We're about the only country that has met all of it. The EU hasn't, nobody else has. We're the only one under the Conservatives, the only major country in the world that's actually on track. Is if you're on track, but it's some sort of self-sacrificial thing, that's no good. No one's going to follow you. They're not going to get kicked out of elections because they didn't do it. The best thing we can do is get the right people in the right roles and maximise the value to this country, and take ourselves with confidence into the 2030s with massive inward investment, much higher wages, to get out of the stagnation that's afflicted us for the last couple of decades, built on this. That's what's exciting. If we get that value right, we do that, and the rest of the world will follow with greater urgency, because they'll say, my God, look how rich the UK has got from doing this. That's what we combine. We combine the moral mission of delivering all this stuff for the wider reasons with a real economic benefit. And then we can also sell it to the most sceptical people, because we say your children, your grandchildren's future is going to be a richer, more prosperous, more secure one. And you've got all sorts of other things. The energy security point. Well, no longer, if the Straits of Hormuz gets closed, it makes less and less impact on us, because we've managed to capture all that ourselves. That's what the future holds. And I hope with the right people, the right influences, things like Great British Energy, which is currently unfocused nonsense, can actually find a role, and I'm sure it can, by working with people like ABP to get the value and just to help. And that's why we had that funds. Maybe this Great British Energy can provide greater levels of funds to unlock more ports, because ports are absolutely key to an awful lot of this stuff. And Great British Energy maybe could play a role there. And once you've actually started, whether it's tidal, whether it's other technologies, you actually see the manufacturing and the supply chain developed here, then they can move at scale. If they've got more, they're bigger than anyone else in the world, and they keep growing, then they can get the benefit which Denmark and other countries got from the development of offshore wind. We started to the extent that we didn't have the industries. And when we decided to press the button and go full bore, it was those people who developed those supply chains who grew up because of the auction mechanism. So we need to be smarter in future. And I'd love it if the currently slightly absurd British Energy were to turn into something which was focused and really delivered and helped unlock some of the value which we, looking back, we've done a phenomenal job. But if I had a criticism of us, is we didn't unlock, cosset inefficient British suppliers at the expense of more efficient foreign ones. That's not what I'm about. But where could we have unlocked more of that value in the UK and had more economic prosperity coming from it? And I think the answer to that, anyone who's looked at it, is yes. So going forward, let's hope that this Labour government can build on the legacy from us and create a fundamental foundation for the prosperity, security of the United Kingdom for the next decades, indeed hundreds of years.
Thank you, Graham. You kept doing sort of good finishes there, and then
Yeah.
we never finished, and you kept going.
I'm not very good at finishing.
But a very optimistic ending. Thank you for that. And it's wine time.
Can we have wine?
Yeah.
So please feel free to stay. It's sort of networking time with speakers and delegates. I can ask you, please, just to do it outside, because we've got another drinks reception at 8, which you're more than welcome to stay for. So we'll sort of continue the drinks party. So please do stay for that. A big thank you to Associated British Ports again for the partnership. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you for coming to join us this evening, and thank you to all of those watching on the live stream. And if we could have a round of applause for our speakers, that would be great.